This Rise and Shine podcast series has been made possible by the generosity of the Zeidelman Family Foundation, which is committed to the unity and continuity of the Jewish people through meaningful and relevant Jewish education and wisdom.
A person can live a perfectly great life without ever once contemplating the existence of God. But then, a person will also run the risk of coming to think that they are God.
This is Rise and Shine, a podcast that offers timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations to fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note. Here is Adrienne Gold Davis.
Did you know that asking for help is as much a Torah commandment, a mitzvah, as providing help is? For many of us, asking for help is the hardest request to make, perhaps because we are vulnerability adverse as a species. So that sort of explains why in Hebrew the word todah, which means thanks, comes from the word hoda'ah, meaning giving thanks. But did you know that the word hoda'ah also means to admit? When we thank someone, we are admitting that they did something, provided something, enlightened us about something that we didn't already know or possess. To say thank you is to admit to a need filled by someone other than yourself. And as a fully interdependent nation, we Jews need to learn how to ask for help as much as we need to admit when we receive it. One thing we learn is that when we were slaves in Egypt, it wasn't until we cried out to God for help that help was forthcoming. You know, it's said that the worst slavery of all when we were in Egypt was that we'd grown accustomed to it. So this brings me to a story. I read it a while ago about a young woman who was in rehab, and on a particular day, the group activity was to move through this elaborate maze, but with a blindfold on. And each person would be accompanied by a silent but ever-present counselor. And as this young woman was navigating the maze, she grew more and more frustrated, particularly because she heard in the distance all her co-travelers calling, "I'm out, I'm out, I'm out." So for 30 minutes, she wandered lost through that maze, and she was feeling increasingly sad and mad and depressed. Finally, she was at her wit's end, and she called out for help. Her counselor promptly removed her blindfold and showed her that the maze had no possible exit, because it was only through asking for help that she and her peers would be let out of that maze. He escorted her back to the entrance. What was he trying to teach her? Because often, what gets in the way of asking for help is not a fear of vulnerability, but rather an ego that cannot tolerate feeling it. Our sages tell us that it's better to focus on our aspirations than our achievements, because it's the ego that's attracted to achievements, that our aspirations are a humbler self-concept, because it implies that not all of our outcomes are under our control. From a Jewish perspective, the effort is more important than the outcome, because the outcome is only in God's hands. We learn that everything is in the hands of heaven, but fear of heaven. And I think that this means that the only thing God doesn't control is whether or not we have a relationship with our Creator. A person can live a perfectly great life without ever once contemplating the existence of God. But then, a person will also run the risk of coming to think that they are God. This is where the ego holds us hostage. You know, in 12-step programs, they often have a sign on the wall that says ego in big letters, EGO, or an acronym that reads edging God out. Developmentally, there's a stage in toddlerhood where the most common phrase is no, or do it myself. You know, I read on a Reddit thread a woman who was struggling with her child who insisted on doing everything herself, and it was making the mother bananas. So she came up with a list of pointers for other moms in this position. Let me read it to you. Okay, let's start with number 1. Let them do as much as you possibly can. Plan on every step taking 10 minutes. That should really take 1 minute. And make accommodations for it as much as possible. Number 2, give limited options, like, do you want the red shirt or the green shirt, instead of an open drawer and a mini analysis paralysis. Number 3, when they're seriously dawdling, not taking a long time because of limited fine motor skills, give a short warning and then do it for them. This will result in a tantrum if they don't finish. Sometimes that's better than dawdling. Only you know. And number 4, when getting out of the house, I put on a song and I say, shoes and coats on and a book for the car by the end of this song. And if they aren't finished, we leave as is, and I go grab their stuff after I get everyone secured in the car. So I thought this was great advice, but how can we apply it to ourselves when we don't want to ask for help as adults? Well, I think it translates to let yourself do as much as you possibly can and be patient with yourself in the process. Then you will know that you've made the appropriate efforts. And when you find yourself in analysis paralysis, as in, what should I do or decide? Then narrow your options down to 2, perhaps with the help of a trusted friend. Give yourself a time limit and hold by it. Then ask for help. How long do you wander through a maze because you couldn't ask for help? You know, I've driven with someone who shall remain nameless when we were undisputably lost, but he, and there's a surprise, right? He refused to stop and ask someone. And as we went further and further off course, I finally risked his ire and I said, I'm going to open Waze now and I'm going to help you navigate. Now, Waze, an Israeli invention, by the way, is a GPS system that includes traffic jams and accidents and shortcuts in its instructions. It's such a gift. But when it comes to non-vehicular mazes, try instead a different sort of GPS. Try God positioning surface. There is nothing to download except your heart and your soul. It's free and it's available 24/7, 365 days a year. If the Torah is an instruction manual for living, then undoubtedly there is a best practices way to get out of the maze in a way that's righteous and holy. So this week, can you find a person you trust who you can not only ask for help from, but who is also looking for best practices in the spiritual directions of living? Someone who studies ethics and morals and holiness through the lens of our Creator's instructions? In Jewish life, this person can become your chavruta. Chavruta is an Aramaic word meaning friendship or companionship, but it is grounded in the practice of 2 people studying together for the purposes of mutual elevation and clarity. May our study help God edge back into our lives in a way that is meaningful and purposeful.
Thanks for listening to Rise and Shine. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Momentum Podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join Adrienne again next time for more timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations that fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note.
This podcast was sponsored by the Zeidelman Family Foundation. Spread the wisdom. Inspire Jewish individuals around the globe by supporting Momentum's podcasts. To sponsor, contact podcast@momentumunlimited.org. You're listening to a Momentum podcast. For unlimited inspiration, wisdom, and empowerment, visit momentumunlimited.org.